The Harrington restaurant had stood on the corner of Madison and 53rd Street since 1973. It had witnessed recessions and revivals. It had survived the disco era and the dot-com bubble. It had weathered the kind of storms that closed lesser establishments and emerged each time with its brass fixtures polished and its reputation intact. On Christmas Eve, the old restaurant transformed into something that belonged on a postcard, something from a gentler world, a world where families still gathered around tables and children still believed in magic and grown men still wept at the sound of Silent Night, played on a piano that had been in the same corner for 40 years. Garlands of fresh pine draped across exposed wooden beams. The scent of forest and winter filled every corner of the dining room. Red candles flickered on white tablecloths, their flames reflected in crystal glasses and polished silverware that had been handed down through 3 generations of owners. The pianist, a white-haired gentleman named Theodore who had played here since 1989, moved through Christmas carols with the kind of reverence that made even the busiest servers pause. His fingers found the keys with muscle memory, and the music rose and fell like breathing. The dining room was full to capacity. Families crowded around large tables, pushed together to accommodate grandparents and cousins and the occasional family friend who had nowhere else to go. Children in their holiday finest squirmed in their seats, their velvet dresses and tiny bow ties already spotted with gravy and cranberry sauce. Their faces glowed with excitement and sugar from hot chocolate piled high with miniature marshmallows. Grandparents raised glasses of wine that caught the candlelight like rubies. They toasted to health, to happiness, to the blessing of another year together. To the ones who were no longer at the table but whose chairs remained, whose memories were spoken aloud like prayers. Laughter rose and fell in waves. It crashed against the old brick walls and rolled back softer, kinder. The sound of silverware against porcelain created a rhythm that spoke of abundance, of togetherness, of everything the season promised to those fortunate enough to have people to share it with. Conversations overlapped in a symphony of connection. Children pleading for one more breadstick, mothers reminding them to use their napkins, fathers telling the same stories they told every year, their voices rising at the same moments, their hands gesturing in the same familiar patterns, because tradition mattered more than novelty, because repetition was its own form of love. And in the corner at table 17, Evelyn Whitmore sat alone. She had occupied this table on Christmas Eve for 10 years. 10 years of watching families celebrate. 10 years of cutting her salmon into precise 1-inch squares and chewing each bite exactly 20 times. 10 years of ordering the same meal. The same wine, the same nothing. She was 34 years old. At 28, she had purchased her first commercial building with a loan that would have crushed most people. At 30, she had turned that building into 5. Now she owned properties in 7 states, each one managed with a cold efficiency that had made her successful and utterly alone. The business magazines called her a visionary. They called her ruthless. They called her unstoppable. They put her face on covers with headlines about breaking glass ceilings and building empires. They asked her about her 5-year plan and her investment strategy and her thoughts on market volatility. No one ever asked her what she did on Christmas. Evelyn wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that had cost $800. It felt like any other sweater. She wore pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, one of the few people who had ever loved her without conditions. Her grandmother had died when Evelyn was 14. 20 years later, Evelyn still remembered the phone call. She had been in the library at Ashford Academy, the boarding school in Connecticut, where she had spent her adolescence. The headmistress had come to find her personally, which was unusual. The headmistress never came to find students personally. "Your grandmother passed away this morning," the woman had said. "Your father has been notified. He will send arrangements." That was it. No embrace, no comfort, no acknowledgement that Evelyn's entire world had just collapsed. Just information delivered and a return to regularly scheduled programming. Her father had sent a car to bring her to the funeral. He had stood beside her at the grave, his new wife on his other side, their 2 young sons fidgeting in their 2 small suits. After the service, he had driven her back to school. He had not invited her to stay with them. He had not asked if she was okay. She was 14 years old, and she had learned in that moment what she had suspected for years. She was not a daughter. She was an obligation, a reminder of a failed marriage, a line item on his conscience that he paid off with tuition checks and birthday cards that arrived 3 weeks late. Now Evelyn sat at table 17 and watched the families around her. She watched fathers lift toddlers onto their shoulders. She watched mothers wipe chocolate from small faces with napkins dipped in water. She watched teenagers roll their eyes at their parents and then lean in to hear the rest of the story anyway. She watched grandparents hold hands across tablecloths, their fingers intertwined like roots that had grown together over decades, their wedding rings worn smooth by time and devotion. The contrast was stark enough to hurt. One room, two worlds, existing in parallel dimensions that never touched. Tables filled with noise and light and belonging. People who laughed too loud and talked with their mouths full and reached across plates to steal fries from each other because that was what family meant. Because love was not polite. Love was messy and loud, and sometimes it spilled red wine on the white tablecloth, and nobody cared. And then there was table 17, where Evelyn Whitmore cut her salmon into perfect squares and chewed each bite 20 times. A habit she had developed at boarding school when eating was just another task to complete efficiently, when dining halls were places to survive rather than enjoy, when she had learned that if you ate quickly enough, you could leave before anyone noticed you were alone, before anyone pitied you. Her table was set for one. It was always set for one. A single napkin folded into the shape of a swan, a single water glass perspiring gently in the warm room, a single menu that she never opened because she always ordered the same thing: grilled salmon, no sauce, steamed vegetables cut into uniform pieces, one glass of white wine that she sipped exactly 3 times before abandoning. The servers knew not to make small talk with her. The manager knew to seat her away from families, away from celebrations, away from anything that might remind her of what she did not have, what she had never had. Evelyn set down her fork. The salmon was fine. The vegetables were fine. Everything was fine. That was the problem. Everything in her life was fine. Her penthouse apartment with its view of Central Park was fine. Her corner office on the 42nd floor was fine. Her investment portfolio and her stock options and her reserved parking space were all fine. Fine was not enough. Fine was a prison built from achievements. She had spent her entire life earning things, earning grades, earning degrees, earning promotions, earning respect, earning money, earning the right to sit at tables where decisions were made. But she had never learned how to earn the things she actually wanted. She had never learned how to be wanted in return. The pianist shifted into silent night. The melody drifted across the dining room like snow falling. Soft, inevitable. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered her grandmother singing this song. She remembered sitting on the old woman's lap in a small house in Vermont, the kind of house with a real fireplace and a Christmas tree that touched the ceiling and cookies left out for Santa, even though Evelyn was old enough to know the truth. She remembered feeling safe. She could not remember the last time she had felt that way. When she opened her eyes, she saw them. They were tucked into an alcove near the kitchen, a forgotten space between the bright dining room and the fluorescent chaos of the dish pit. The kind of space where servers took their breaks and ate hurried meals standing up. A man and a boy. The man wore black slacks and a white shirt. The uniform of a server, though the shift in his posture suggested his break had just begun. He was in his mid-30s with the kind of face that had seen too many early mornings and late nights. His hands were rough, calloused. The hands of someone who knew work intimately and had made peace with it. The boy was perhaps 7 years old. He sat on a folding chair with his feet dangling 6 inches from the floor, wearing shoes that were slightly too big. He wore a paper Santa hat that he had clearly made himself. The construction paper was carefully folded and stapled. The cotton ball at the tip was slightly lopsided, but attached with enough glue to survive whatever journey it had taken to get here. Between them on a small plastic table sat a cupcake, just one cupcake, chocolate with vanilla frosting. The kind you could buy at a discount store for $1.50 because the frosting had smeared slightly during the day. The kind that was perfectly fine, but not quite good enough to sell at full price. The man produced a candle from his pocket, a single birthday candle, white and thin, the kind that came in a package of 50 for $2 at the grocery store. Evelyn watched him strike a match. The flame hissed to life in his cupped hands. He touched it to the wick, and the candle caught. a single point of light in the dim alcove. The boy began to hum, "Jingle Bells." His voice was so soft it might have been mistaken for the building settling, for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, for the whisper of snow against the windows. But Evelyn heard it. She heard it, and something inside her chest cracked. It was a small sound, like ice breaking on a frozen lake when spring first arrives, like a door opening after years of being locked. The man hummed along. His voice was slightly off-key but earnest. Father and son huddled over a $1.50 cupcake singing Jingle Bells in a service alcove while the rest of the restaurant celebrated with champagne and prime rib and desserts that cost more than that man probably made in an hour. And they were happy. They were actually genuinely, unmistakably happy. Evelyn set down her knife and fork. She could not remember the last time she had felt what she saw on their faces. That simple, uncomplicated joy. That sense of enough, of completeness, of having everything that mattered even when you had almost nothing at all. She watched the boy close his eyes. He scrunched his face in concentration. His lips moved silently, forming words that only he would ever know. A wish, a prayer, the kind of hope that children carry like treasure pure and unbroken by the world's disappointments. He blew out the candle. The smoke curled upward in a thin ribbon and disappeared. The man reached across the table and took his son's hand. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. Even from across the room, Evelyn could see the shine in his eyes, the fierce, protective love of a father who would give his son the world if he could, who was giving him the world in the only way he could afford. Evelyn stood. She did not plan to stand. Her body simply rose as if pulled by a force she did not understand and could not resist. Her legs carried her forward. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. She was aware of her own strangeness. A woman in expensive cashmere walking toward the service alcove like she had business there. She was aware that she did not belong, that she was crossing an invisible line between worlds that were not meant to touch. But she kept walking. The man looked up. His face showed confusion first, then worry. In his experience, when someone from the dining room approached him, it meant a complaint. It meant something had gone wrong. It meant his job might be at risk. He stood quickly. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" His voice was careful, polite, the voice of someone who had learned to make himself small, to apologize for existing in spaces where wealthy people wanted to pretend he did not. Evelyn stopped 3 feet away. Up close, she could see the wear in his shirt collar, the careful way it had been mended. She could see the tiredness around his eyes, the kind that came from working double shifts and still coming up short. She could see his fear, and she understood it, because she recognized something in his face that she saw in her own mirror every morning. A loneliness so deep it had become invisible, a longing so constant it felt like breathing. She opened her mouth to speak. The words she had prepared would not come. Something polite and distant, something appropriate for a CEO addressing an employee, something that would maintain the walls she had spent her whole life building. Instead, she heard herself say, "Are you celebrating Christmas?" The question hung in the air. The man blinked. The boy looked up at her with wide ease. "Yes, ma'am," the boy said. His voice was quiet but clear. "We're having our Christmas party." Something in his formality undid Evelyn completely. The way he called her ma'am, the way he sat up straighter in her presence, the way he had been taught to respect adults, even strangers, even people who interrupted his one precious moment of celebration. She felt her eyes sting. She blinked rapidly. "It looks lovely," she managed to say. The man's posture relaxed slightly, just slightly. His guard was still up, but the immediate fear of a complaint had passed. "Thank you, we were just finishing up." "I don't mean to intrude," the words came out halting, unpracticed. Evelyn Whitmore, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, who faced down hostile takeovers and boardroom battles with ice in her veins, could not seem to string together a simple sentence. "But I was wondering," she stopped. This was absurd. This was completely, utterly absurd. She was a woman who commanded respect in every room she entered. She owned buildings. She employed thousands of people. She had been on the cover of Fortune magazine. And she could not ask a simple question. "Would it be all right if I joined you?" Silence. The man stared at her. The boy tilted his head, his paper Santa hat shifting to one side. "Join us," the man repeated, "for Christmas." Her voice was barely a whisper now. She could feel the heat rising in her face, the humiliation of vulnerability, the exposure of need. I don't have anyone to celebrate with. There it was, the truth she had never spoken aloud. The truth she had hidden behind achievements and acquisitions and the relentless forward motion of success. You both looking so happy. I just thought. She stopped again. I'm sorry. This is inappropriate. Forget I asked. She turned to leave. Her heels clicked against the floor. One step, two steps, three. You can sit with us. The boy's voice stopped her. She turned. He was pointing to a third folding chair leaning against the wall. His expression was open, trusting. The way children look before the world teaches them to be suspicious. We have an extra chair, he said. My dad says sharing makes things better. Evelyn looked at the man. His name tag said Graham. Graham was looking at his son with an expression Evelyn could not quite read. Pride, maybe, or wonder. The constant amazement of parents who cannot believe the goodness their children carry. Then he looked at Evelyn, and he saw something in her face that he recognized. It's not much, he said slowly. But you're welcome to join us. Evelyn's breath caught. Graham unfolded the third chair. The alcove was small, meant for one person on break, maybe two if they were friendly. With three people, their knees nearly touched. The plastic table between them could barely hold the cupcake and the boy's notebook. But Evelyn sat down as if it were the finest seat she had ever occupied. The boy pushed the cupcake toward her. Would you like some? I couldn't, Evelyn said. That's yours. Dad says sharing makes things better. Evelyn looked at Graham. He shrugged. A small movement that said he had taught his son this because it was true. She carefully broke off a small piece of the cupcake. The frosting was sweet, too sweet, the kind of sweet that came from a discount bakery using the cheapest ingredients. But it tasted like something more. It tasted like communion, like acceptance, like being invited to a table where she had not had to earn her seat. The boy began to talk. His name was Theo. He was 7 years old. He went to PS 142 on the east side, and his teacher was Mrs. Patterson, and she let him read chapter books during quiet time because he was already finished with the second grade curriculum. He told her about the snowflake he had made in art class, about the classroom hamster named Mr. Whiskers who had escaped last week and was found sleeping in the principal's inbox, about the book he was reading where a boy found a dragon egg in his backyard and had to hide it from his parents. Graham sat quietly watching his son with the kind of attention that made it clear this child was the center of his universe. Evelyn listened. She asked questions. She laughed when Theo described Mr. Whisker's great escape, the hamster's tiny paws scrabbling against the smooth plastic of the principal's inbox, the shriek that the principal had made when she found him. For 20 minutes, Evelyn Whitmore forgot that she was a CEO. She forgot that she owned buildings in 7 states. She forgot that her calendar was booked 3 months in advance. She forgot the quarterly earnings report due next week. She forgot the board meeting after the holiday. She forgot the empty penthouse waiting for her. She forgot the silence that filled her life like water filling a sinking ship. She was just a woman sitting at a folding table with a father and son, eating a shared cupcake, listening to a 7-year-old boy talk about his life. Then someone recognized her. It happened quickly. A man at table 8 stood to use the restroom. He walked past the alcove and did a double take. His face registered confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like delight. Miss Whitmore Evelyn looked up. She recognized him. Marcus Webb, a real estate investor she had met at a conference in Chicago last year. He had tried to get a meeting with her several times since then. She had declined each request. I thought that was you. His voice was loud. Too loud. It carried across the dining room like a stone thrown into still water. Having dinner with the staff, the word staff landed like an accusation. Around them, other diners began to turn. Whispers started. A few people pulled out their phones. That's very generous of you. Very charitable. He smiled as he said it, but his eyes were calculating, already composing the story he would tell at his next cocktail party. The great Evelyn Whitmore slumming it with the service workers on Christmas Eve. How touching, how performative, how typical of these rich people who needed to feel good about themselves. The manager appeared from the kitchen. Her name tag said Margaret. Her expression was tight with concern. Is everything all right here? Graham understood immediately what was happening. This was not just a lonely woman joining a Christmas celebration. This was Evelyn Whitmore, the Evelyn Whitmore. The woman whose name appeared in the business section of newspapers. The woman who had just acquired the building that housed this very restaurant. And she was sitting in a service alcove with one of her employees eating a discount cupcake like it was normal. Graham stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. The sound was sharp. Final. Evelyn stood as well. The warmth of the past 20 minutes evaporated. The walls came back up. The invisible barriers between their worlds reasserted themselves. Graham, please, Evelyn began. Did you think this was amusing? His words came out harder than he intended, but he could not stop them. He had spent his entire life being looked down upon by people like her, being invisible to them except when they needed something. Slumming it with the working class on Christmas Eve, Theo looked between them. His small face crumpled with confusion and fear at the sudden change in his father's tone. No, that's not what this was. Then what was it? Graham's hands clenched at his sides. A photo opportunity, a story you'll tell at your next board meeting. Evelyn's face crumpled. She reached for her purse. A practiced motion, the instinct to smooth things over with money, to write a check, to make the problem go away. But the look on Graham's face stopped her. I don't want your charity, he said quietly. I wasn't offering charity. I was asking for company. It's the same thing when you're you and I'm me. The words landed like a slap. Evelyn looked at him. Then at Theo, who had shrunk back in his chair. His paper Santa hat was crumpled in his small fists now. His eyes were wet. She felt the entire restaurant watching. She felt the weight of her own name, her own success crushing the one genuine moment she had experienced in years. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. She did not return to table 17. She collected her coat from the hostess stand and walked toward the door. But a small voice stopped her. Wait. She turned. Theo had followed her. He stood in the middle of the dining room, his two big shoes scuffing against the hardwood floor. His paper Santa hat was still crumpled in his hands. He held it out to her. You forgot this, he said. I didn't. I made it for you. His voice was quiet but certain. So you could be part of our Christmas party. Evelyn stared at the hat. It was wrinkled and slightly torn. The cotton ball was barely hanging on. It was the most worthless thing she had ever been offered, and the most valuable. She took it with shaking hands. Thank you, Theo. The boy nodded solemnly. Then he turned and walked back to where his father stood watching. Graham's face was unreadable, but he put his hand on his son's shoulder, and he did not say anything to take back the gift. Evelyn pushed through the front door. The cold December air hit her face like a slap. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since she had arrived. Her breath misted in the glow of the streetlights. She stood on the sidewalk, her cashmere coat pulled tight around her, the paper Santa hat clutched in both hands. And she realized she was crying. Not the careful, controlled tears she sometimes shed in the privacy of her bathroom where no one could see. Not the single tear that escaped during particularly moving movies quickly wiped away and forgotten. Deep, wrenching moss, the kind that came from a place she had locked away for decades. She covered her face with one hand, ashamed of the rawness of it. A passing couple looked at her with concern, then looked away. A homeless man on the corner watched her without judgment. The snow began to fall, light and delicate, the kind that disappeared the moment it touched the ground. Evelyn stood there for a long time. She stood there until the cold seeped through her $800 sweater, until her fingers grew numb around the paper hat, until the tears finally stopped and left her feeling hollowed out and strange. Then she walked home. Her penthouse was 17 blocks away. She could have called a car. She had an app on her phone that would summon a driver in minutes. She had a standing account with 3 different black car services. But she walked. She walked past shop windows decorated with fairy lights, past couples holding hands, past a Salvation Army volunteer ringing a bell beside a red bucket. She put a $100 bill in the bucket without stopping, without making eye contact, without waiting for thanks. She walked past a church where midnight mass was just beginning, the doors opened to release the sound of a choir singing O Holy Night. She walked past a bar where people spilled onto the sidewalk laughing and shouting and alive in ways she had forgotten how to be. She walked until she reached her building. The doorman greeted her by name. Merry Christmas, Miss Whitmore. Merry Christmas, Raymond. She took the elevator to the 48th floor. Her penthouse was exactly as she had left it. Clean, cold, perfect. The cleaning service had been there yesterday. Everything was in its place. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. She set the paper Santa hat on her kitchen counter. It looked absurd there. Crumpled red construction paper in a lopsided cotton ball sitting on Italian marble beside a fruit bowl that contained 3 perfect green apples she had never eaten. Evelyn poured herself a glass of water. She drank it slowly. She looked out at the city, at the lights, at the snow falling past her windows, at the world going on without her as it always had, as it always would. And she thought about what the boy had said. My dad says sharing makes things better. She thought about what Graham had said. It's the same thing when you're you and I'm me. He was wrong, but he was also right. She had walked into that alcove looking for connection. She had found it briefly in the warmth of a shared cupcake and a child's easy acceptance. But she had also brought with her the weight of her name, her money, her success. She could not escape who she was. But maybe she could become someone different. Evelyn looked at the paper Santa hat. She picked it up. She put it on her head. It was too small for her. The construction paper dug into her temples. The cotton ball hung limply to one side, brushing against her cheek. She looked at herself in the darkened window. A 34-year-old woman in an $800 sweater, standing alone in a $20 million apartment, wearing a paper Santa hat made by a 7-year-old boy who had nothing and had given her everything. For the first time in 10 years, Evelyn Whitmore did not know what came next. And for the first time in 10 years, that uncertainty felt like hope. The paper Santa hat sat on Evelyn's kitchen counter for 3 days. She did not move it. She did not throw it away. She walked past it every morning on her way to the coffee machine, and every morning she paused, just for a moment, just long enough to remember the weight of a 7-year-old's trust. On the 4th day, she picked it up. She carried it to her home office, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. A room designed by an interior decorator who charged $500 an hour. A room with a desk that had belonged to a railroad baron in the 1800s, and a chair that cost more than most people's cars. She set the paper hat on her desk next to her computer. Then she began to work. But the work felt different now. She read through quarterly reports and saw numbers. Just numbers. Revenue projections and profit margins and return on investment. Words that had once made her heart race with ambition now sat flat on the page like dead leaves. She attended video conferences with her executive team. She listened to them discuss acquisitions and expansions in market opportunities. She heard herself speaking, saying the right things, asking the right questions. But her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. On the 5th day, she pulled up the employee records for the Harrington restaurant. She found him easily. Graham Hollister, age 36, employed as server and maintenance staff for 4 years. Emergency contact, none listed. Dependents, 1. Theodore Hollister, age 7. She scrolled through his file. His performance reviews were excellent, reliable, hardworking, willing to take on extra shifts. The kind of employee every business wanted and few appreciated. His pay was $14 an hour. No health insurance, no paid sick leave, no retirement benefits. Evelyn closed the file. She opened a new document. For 3 hours she wrote. She revised company policy. She drafted memos. She calculated costs and projected impacts and prepared arguments for the board of directors who would inevitably push back. By the end of the day, every employee of the Harrington restaurant would have health insurance, paid sick leave, a living wage, a retirement plan. It was the least she could do. It was nowhere near enough. The changes took effect on January 15th. Evelyn did not announce them personally. She did not show up at the restaurant to accept gratitude. She simply signed the papers and let her HR department handle the rest. But she heard about the reactions. Margaret, the manager, had cried when she read the new policy. She had called her husband immediately, her voice shaking. They could finally afford to fix the car. They could finally take their daughter to the dentist. They could finally breathe. The dishwashers, most of them immigrants who sent money home to families in other countries, had gathered in the break room and toasted each other with cups of coffee. One of them, a man named Eduardo, who had worked there for 11 years without a single sick day because he could not afford to miss work, had wept openly. And Graham Hollister had said nothing. He had read the memo. He had nodded once. He had gone back to work. But that night, according to the security cameras, Evelyn definitely should not have been watching. He had stayed late. He had sat in the alcove where he and Theo had celebrated Christmas. He had put his head in his hands, and his shoulders had shaken. Evelyn watched the footage 3 times. Then she deleted it from her viewing history and tried to forget. February came cold and gray. Evelyn returned to the Harrington for the first time since Christmas Eve. She did not sit at table 17. She sat at the bar in the corner where she could see the dining room but remained mostly hidden. She ordered a glass of wine she did not drink. She watched Graham work. He moved through the restaurant with quiet efficiency. He refilled water glasses and cleared plates and answered questions about the menu with patience and warmth. He smiled at customers. He joked with the other servers. He was by all appearances a man at peace with his place in the world. But Evelyn saw the moments between. The way his smile faded when he turned away from a table. The way his shoulders carried tension that never quite released. The way he checked his phone during every break, looking at something that made his face go soft and worried at the same time. She knew he was checking on Theo. She knew because she had done the same thing once, when her grandmother was sick, when every moment away from the hospital felt like abandonment. She finished her wine without tasting it. She left a $100 tip on a $15 tab. She did not speak to Graham. She was not ready, and neither was he. March brought rain. It fell for 7 days straight, turning the city gray and heavy. The streets flooded, the subways delayed. Everyone moved through the world with their heads down and their umbrellas up, trying to get from one dry place to another without drowning. Evelyn sat in her office and reviewed a development proposal. It was a routine document, the kind that crossed her desk every week. A building her company owned, a plan to renovate and repurpose, a projection of profits that would make her shareholders very happy. She read the address. She read it again. She picked up her phone and called her head of acquisitions. "Tell me about the Riverside Commons project." His voice came through eager, pleased that she was taking a personal interest. "It's a gem, Miss Whitmore. We acquired the building 2 years ago. Old residential property, 50 units. The tenants are mostly long-term, low-income. Month-to-month leases, nothing binding. We can clear them out with 60 days notice and convert the whole thing to luxury condos. The location is perfect. We're looking at a 400% return." "Who lives there?" "Excuse me, the tenants." "Who are they?" A pause. "I don't have that information in front of me." "Working families, I assume. Some elderly, the usual mix for that kind of property." "Why do you ask?" "Send me the tenant list." She hung up before he could respond. The list arrived in her inbox 20 minutes later. Evelyn scrolled through it slowly. 50 names, 50 families, 50 stories she did not know and had never thought to ask about. Then she saw it. Apartment 4C, Hollister Graham, Hollister Theodore. She stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. The rain continued to fall outside her window, running down the grease in silver streams that distorted the city below. Evelyn Whitmore had built her empire on calculated decisions, on cold analysis, on the understanding that business was business and sentiment had no place in the boardroom. She had never questioned a development project before. She had never looked at the names. She picked up the phone again. "Delay the Riverside Commons project indefinitely." "Miss Whitmore, we're scheduled to break ground in 60 days. The contractors are already delay it. But the board, I'll handle the board." She hung up. The board meeting was held on March 15th. Evelyn sat at the head of a long table made of reclaimed wood from a 19th century barn in Vermont. 12 faces looked back at her. 12 people who had invested their money and their trust in her judgment. And for the first time, she was about to disappoint them. "The Riverside Commons project," she said. "I'm putting it on hold." Murmurs around the table. A man named Phillips, who had been on the board since before Evelyn took over, leaned forward. "May I ask why I have concerns about the displacement of current tenants?" Silence. Then slowly Phillips smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Displacement," he repeated. "Evelyn, we displace tenants every time we improve a property. That's the business. You know that better than anyone, I'm aware." "Then what's changed?" She did not answer. "Because if I didn't know better," Phillips continued, "I'd say you were letting personal feelings interfere with a sound business decision. And that would be very unlike you." Evelyn met his eyes. The project is on hold. That's my decision. Your decision, Phillips said, affects all of our investments. If you're no longer capable of making objective choices, I'm capable. Are you? Because I've heard some interesting rumors about Christmas Eve. Something about you sitting in a service hallway with an employee and his child. The room went cold. Evelyn felt the other board members watching her, measuring her, wondering if the rumors were true, wondering if their CEO had lost her edge. My personal life, she said carefully, is not relevant to this discussion. It's relevant if it's affecting your judgment. My judgment is fine. Then explain the delay. She could not. She could not tell them about a paper Santa had on her kitchen counter, about a 7-year-old boy who had offered her a piece of a discount cupcake, about a father who had accused her of slumming and been absolutely right. She could not tell them that she had looked at a development proposal and for the first time in her career seen people instead of numbers. The project needs further review, she said. That's all I'm prepared to say at this time. Phillips leaned back in his chair. Very well, but I want you to know that some of us are watching very closely. The meeting adjourned. Evelyn returned to her office and closed the door. She stood at the window for a long time looking out at the city she had helped build, the towers of glass and steel, the monuments to ambition and profit, the empire she had constructed one acquisition at a time. It had never felt so empty. A knock at the door. She turned. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Miss Whitmore, there's someone here to see you. He says it's personal. She was about to refuse. She always refused unscheduled visitors, but something made her pause. Who is it? He says his name is Richard Whitmore. Evelyn's hand tightened on the edge of her desk. Send him in. The door opened. Her father was 62 years old. He had the same sharp features she saw in her own mirror, the same gray eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw. He had built this company from nothing. He had handed it to her 10 years ago when he retired to focus on his second family. His real family, as Evelyn had always thought of them. The wife who made him happy. The sons who carried on his name. He had not visited her office in 3 years. Evelyn, father. He crossed the room slowly. His movements were stiffer than she remembered. Age was catching up with him as it caught up with everyone. I heard about the board meeting, he said. Of course you did. Phillips called me. He's concerned. Phillips is always concerned. Richard stopped in front of her desk. He looked at the paper Santa had sitting next to her computer. His eyebrows rose slightly. What's that A gift? From whom? Someone who had nothing and gave me everything. Silence. Richard sat down without being invited. He folded his hands in his lap and looked at his daughter with an expression she could not read. I know about the Riverside Commons project, he said. I know why you delayed it. You found out that someone you care about lives there? Evelyn said nothing. I also know, Richard continued, that you spent Christmas Eve eating cake with a restaurant employee and his son, and that you've changed the employee benefits policy for that restaurant at considerable expense, and that you've been coming back to that restaurant every few weeks sitting at the bar watching him work. You've been having me followed. I've been keeping an eye on my investment. I'm not your investment. I'm your daughter. The words came out sharper than she intended. Richard's face did not change. You're both, he said, and right now both are at risk. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. You're making decisions that don't make financial sense. You're giving the board reasons to question your leadership. I'm making decisions that make human sense. Human sense doesn't keep shareholders happy. Maybe it should. Evelyn. Richard leaned forward. I built this company with my bare hands. I gave it to you because I believed you were strong enough to carry it forward. Don't prove me wrong. Is that a threat? It's advice from your father. You haven't been my father in 20 years. The words landed like stones. Richard's face finally showed something, a flicker of pain, quickly suppressed. I deserved that, he said quietly. Yes, you did. Silence stretched between them. Evelyn turned back to the window. She could see her own reflection in the glass, and behind her the reflection of the man who had abandoned her, who had chosen a new family over her, who had sent tuition checks instead of love. You asked what that hat is, she said. Richard waited. It was made by a 7-year-old boy. His father works 3 jobs to keep them fed. They celebrated Christmas with a cupcake that cost $1.50 because that's all they could afford. And when I asked if I could join them, they said yes. She turned to face him. They had nothing. But they gave me a place at their table. Do you know what that feels like? Richard did not answer. You never gave me a place at your table. Not once in 30 years. I had to earn every scrap of acknowledgement, every moment of your attention, every sign that you remembered I existed. Her voice broke. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of being your daughter. And now I realize that's not how it works. You can't earn belonging. It's just given or it's not. Evelyn. Richard stood. He took a step toward her. For a moment, he looked like he might reach out, might touch her shoulder, might offer some gesture of comfort. But he stopped. Don't let emotion destroy everything you have built. He turned and walked out of the office. The door closed behind him. Evelyn stood alone. The rain continued to fall. Spring turned to summer. Summer burned into fall. Evelyn kept the Riverside Commons project on hold. The board grumbled, but did not act. Phillips made pointed comments at every meeting, but he did not have the votes to remove her. She continued to visit the Harrington. Sometimes she sat at the bar. Sometimes she took a table near the back. She never approached Graham. She never spoke to him directly, but she watched. She watched him work double shifts to cover bills. She watched him leave early when Theo had a doctor's appointment. She watched him age in small increments, the stress lines deepening around his eyes, the gray appearing at his temples. She watched him love his son with a ferocity that made her chest ache, and she began to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly in small ways that added up to something larger. She started asking about the tenants in her buildings. Not just numbers, but names, stories, histories. She started reviewing eviction notices personally, started questioning the necessity of each one, started looking for alternatives. She started seeing people. It was she realized the first time in her career that she had allowed herself to see them. The first time she had let herself feel the weight of the decisions she made. The first time she had understood that every number on a spreadsheet was a family, a life, a story. It was exhausting. It was also somehow the only thing that made her feel alive. December came cold and clear, the anniversary of the night that had changed everything. Evelyn sat in her penthouse, the paper Santa hat on the table in front of her. It was more worn now. The cotton ball had fallen off entirely. The construction paper had faded from bright red to something softer, gentler. She picked it up and held it carefully. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. Tomorrow Graham and Theo would celebrate again. Another cupcake, another candle, another moment of perfect impossible joy. And she would not be there. She had not been invited. She had not earned the right. Her phone rang. She almost did not answer. But something made her pick it up. Miss Whitmore, this is Margaret from the Harrington. Evelyn sat up straight. What's wrong? It's Theo, Graham's son. He had an asthma attack at the restaurant about an hour ago. The ambulance took him to Mount Sinai. Graham went with him. I thought you should know. The phone slipped from Evelyn's hand. She did not remember calling her driver. She did not remember the ride to the hospital. She did not remember pushing through the emergency room doors or demanding information from the nurse at the front desk. She only remembered stopping. Graham was sitting in the hallway outside the pediatric ward. His head was in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. He was still wearing his work uniform, the white shirt stained with something dark. Coffee, maybe. Or blood. Evelyn approached slowly. Graham looked up. His face was a mask of exhaustion and fear. His eyes were red. His hands trembled. What are you doing here? I heard what happened. From who? Doesn't matter. How is he? Graham stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked away. They don't know yet. His lungs. He has chronic asthma. Usually it's manageable. But tonight, his voice broke. He was just sitting there, drawing in his notebook, and then he couldn't breathe. I couldn't. Graham, I couldn't help him. The words came out ragged, broken. Evelyn sat down next to him. Not close, not touching, but near enough that he could feel her presence. Near enough that he would know he was not alone. They sat in silence. The hospital hummed around them. Machines beeped. Phones rang. Nurses hurried past with clipboards and concerned expressions. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air like a promise and a threat. Minutes passed, then an hour. Graham did not speak. Evelyn did not leave. At midnight, a doctor emerged from the pediatric ward. Mr. Hollister Graham stood so fast he nearly fell. Is he okay? Is Theo okay? He's stable. The word landed like grace. Graham's legs gave out. Evelyn caught his arm and steadied him. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, the doctor continued. But the attack has passed. He's breathing on his own now. Can I see him? Of course, Graham turned to Evelyn. His face was different now. The fear had receded. Something else had taken its place. Something softer. Thank you, he said. I didn't do anything. You stayed. She had no response to that. Graham disappeared through the doors. Evelyn sank back into the plastic chair. She should go home. There was nothing more she could do here. Graham had his son. The crisis had passed, but she did not move. She sat in the hospital hallway for the rest of the night. She was still there when the sun came up. She was still there when Graham emerged at 7 in the morning, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes clear. He stopped when he saw her. You're still here. Evelyn stood. Her back ached. Her neck was stiff. She had never spent a night in a hospital waiting room before. She had never spent a night anywhere uncomfortable before. How is Theo asking for pancakes? The nurses are in love with him. A ghost of a smile crossed Graham's face. Then it faded. Why did you stay? Evelyn considered the question. Because I know what it feels like to be alone in a crisis. And I didn't want you to feel that way. Graham studied her. You've been coming to the restaurant, he said. I've seen you. I know. Why, I'm not sure. To watch, I suppose. To remind myself that something real exists. Something real. Your life. Your son. The way you love him. The way he loves you. It's the most real thing I've ever seen. Graham was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down next to her. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. Car accident on the interstate. She was coming home from her mother's house. It was raining. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. It doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. Graham leaned back against the wall. After she died, I didn't know how to keep going. I didn't know how to be a father without her. She was the one who knew all the songs, all the stories, all the ways to make everything okay. I was just there. Evelyn listened. But Theo, he said, Theo taught me something. He taught me that love isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about showing up. Every day. Even when you're broken. Even when you don't know what you're doing. You just show up. He looked at her. You showed up last night. It was the least I could do. No, it was everything. Silence fell between them, not the awkward silence of strangers, something deeper. The silence of two people who had both known loss, who had both built walls, who were both tentatively beginning to let those walls come down. I owe you an apology, Graham said, for Christmas Eve, for what I said. You were protecting your son. I was protecting myself. I saw someone rich and powerful taking an interest in us, and I assumed the worst. Because that's what I've learned to expect from people like you. People like me. People who have everything. I don't have everything. Graham looked at her. What don't you have? The answer came slowly. A place to belong. Graham nodded. Neither do I some days. But Theo is my place. He's my home. Even when everything else falls apart, I have him. That's beautiful. It's terrifying, loving someone that much. Knowing you could lose them at any moment. But also, he paused, also worth it. Evelyn thought about the paper Santa had on her desk, about the cupcakes she had shared, and about the 20 minutes of warmth that had changed everything. I grew up in boarding school, she said. My parents divorced when I was 6. My father remarried. My mother moved to Europe. I was. Convenient to forget. Graham listened without interrupting. I learned that if I wanted attention, I had to earn it. Straight A's, awards, achievements. I built my whole life around proving that I deserved to exist. And then I realized. She stopped. You can't earn belonging, she finished. It's just given or it's not. Graham was quiet, then he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, the hands of a worker, the hands of a father. It's not too late, he said. Evelyn looked at him. For what? To find a place. The hospital continued to hum around them. But in that moment, in that hallway, something shifted. Something that had been broken began slowly to heal. The weeks after the hospital changed everything. Evelyn began visiting Theo during his recovery. At first she came with books, then puzzles, then art supplies that she had no idea how to choose, so she bought everything the store clerk recommended. Theo accepted each gift with the same grave politeness he had shown on Christmas Eve. But gradually his formality softened into something warmer. He started saving his best drawings to show her. He started asking when she would come back. He started calling her Evelyn instead of ma'am. Graham watched these developments with cautious hope. He did not trust easily. Life had taught him that people with money always wanted something. That kindness from the wealthy came with invisible strings. But Evelyn asked for nothing. She sat on the floor of Theo's hospital room and helped him build a Lego castle. She listened to him explain the plot of his favorite book in exhaustive detail. She laughed at his jokes, even the ones that did not make sense. She showed up. Again and again she showed up. The day Theo was discharged from the hospital, Evelyn was there. She had brought a new winter coat for him. A good one, not from a thrift store. The kind that would keep him warm through the coldest February nights. Graham tried to refuse it. He can't accept that. Why not? Because it costs more than my rent. Evelyn looked at him steadily. He needs a warm coat. This is a warm coat. Everything else is just pride. Graham opened his mouth to argue. Then he looked at his son, who was already trying on the coat, his small face glowing with delight at the soft lining and the hood that actually covered his ears. He closed his mouth. Thank you, he said quietly. It was the first time he had accepted anything from her without a fight. December arrived like an old friend. The city transformed once again. Lights appeared in windows. Trees went up in living rooms and office lobbies. The Salvation Army bells returned to street corners, their familiar ring cutting through the cold air. 1 year had passed since the night Evelyn had whispered those 4 words. Can I join you? 1 year since a paper Santa hat had changed the trajectory of her life. She still had the hat. She had taken it to a preservation specialist, a woman who normally worked with historical documents and rare manuscripts. The woman had looked at the crumpled construction paper with confusion. You want me to preserve this? Yes. It's just a child's craft project. It's the most valuable thing I own. The specialist had laminated it carefully, sealing the faded red paper and the memory it held between layers of protective plastic. Now it sat on Evelyn's desk next to a framed photograph that had not been there a year ago. The photograph showed 3 people: a man with tired eyes and rough hands, a boy with a paper Santa hat and a gap-toothed smile, a woman in a cashmere sweater who looked for the first time in her life like she belonged somewhere. Margaret had taken the photo at the Harrington one evening in October when Evelyn had joined Graham and Theo for dinner. A real dinner at a real table with real conversation and laughter and the kind of mess that came from a 7-year-old eating spaghetti. Evelyn looked at that photograph every morning. It reminded her of who she was becoming. The board meeting was scheduled for December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. The timing was deliberate. Phillips had pushed for it, knowing that the holiday pressure would work in his favor. People wanted to go home to their families. People wanted to wrap presents and drink eggnog and forget about quarterly earnings. People would vote quickly just to get it over with. The agenda had only one item: the Riverside Commons project. Phillips had spent the past year building his coalition. He had wined and dined the other board members. He had whispered about Evelyn's erratic behavior. He had pointed to the delayed project as evidence of her declining judgment. Now he was ready to force a vote. Evelyn sat in her office the night before the meeting. The city glittered below her, a galaxy of lights and lives. Somewhere out there, families were decorating trees. Children were writing letters to Santa. Parents were hiding presents in closets and attics and the trunks of cars. Somewhere out there, Graham was working a double shift so he could have Christmas Day off to spend with Theo. Somewhere out there, 50 families in the Riverside Commons building were celebrating what might be their last holiday in their homes. Evelyn did not know what tomorrow would bring. She had the votes to block the project. Barely. If everyone who had promised to support her actually followed through. If no one changed their mind at the last minute. If Phillips did not have one more trick up his sleeve. A knock at her door. She looked up. Her assistant had gone home hours ago. The building was nearly empty. Security would have called if someone unauthorized was in the building, which meant it was someone authorized. Come in. The door opened. Richard Whitmore stood in the doorway. He looked older than the last time she had seen him, more fragile. The year had not been kind to him. She had heard rumors of health problems, a heart scare in September, a warning from his doctors to slow down. He had not slowed down. Men like her father never did. "I didn't expect to see you," Evelyn said. "I know." Richard entered the office slowly. His movements were careful now, measured in a way they had never been before. He lowered himself into the chair across from her desk with a small grunt of effort. His eyes fell on the paper Santa hat. "You still have that. I'll always have it." Silence stretched between them. Richard reached into his jacket pocket. He withdrew an envelope. It was old and yellowed, the paper soft with age. The handwriting on the front was faded but still legible. He set it on the desk. "Your grandmother gave this to me," he said, "the week before she died. She made me promise to give it to you when the time was right." Evelyn stared at the envelope. Her grandmother's handwriting. She would recognize it anywhere. The careful loops and flourishes of a woman who had learned penmanship in an era when such things mattered. "I've been carrying it for 20 years, Richard continued. "I kept telling myself the time wasn't right, that you weren't ready, that I wasn't ready." He paused. "The truth is I was afraid. Afraid of what she wrote, afraid of what it would mean." Evelyn picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her grandmother's handwriting. The ink had faded from black to brown, but the words were still clear. "My dear Richard, I am writing this knowing I don't have much time left. The doctors say weeks. I think they are being optimistic. But that is not why I write. I write because I am worried about Evelyn. She is a remarkable child, strong and brilliant and determined. She will achieve great things. Of this I have no doubt. But I am afraid for her. I am afraid that she will learn the wrong lessons from her childhood, that she will believe love must be earned, that she will build walls instead of bridges, that she will chase success because she does not know how to chase connection. I'm afraid she will become like you." Evelyn stopped reading. She looked at her father. His face was pale. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. "Keep reading," he said hoarsely. Evelyn returned to the letter. "I do not say this to hurt you, Richard. I say it because I love you and I have watched you make the same mistakes I made with your father. We are a family of achievers. We measure ourselves by our accomplishments. We forget that the only accomplishment that truly matters is learning how to love. Evelyn is still young enough to learn, but she will not learn from you, not unless you change. So I am asking you, Richard, I am begging you, do not let her become a monument to loneliness. Do not let her reach the end of her life and realize she has won every battle except the one that mattered. Teach her that success means nothing if there is no one to share it with. Teach her that belonging cannot be earned. Teach her that love is given freely or it is not love at all. And if you cannot teach her these things, then at least give her this letter. Let her know that someone saw her, someone loved her, someone believed she was worthy not because of what she accomplished, but simply because she existed. I will love her even after I am gone. I will love you too, Richard, even though you have forgotten how to feel it." Your mother, Evelyn, set down the letter. Her face was wet. She had not realized she was crying. Richard sat motionless in his chair. His own eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She was right," he said, "about everything. I became exactly what she feared, and I let you become the same thing." Evelyn said nothing. "I told myself I was teaching you strength," Richard continued. "Independence. I told myself the world was hard and you needed to be harder. But that was a lie. The truth is I didn't know how to love you. I never learned. My father never taught me, and his father never taught him. We are generations of men who built empires and lost our children." He leaned forward. "I am sorry, Evelyn, for everything, for the boarding schools and the missed birthdays and the way I chose my new family over you. I am sorry for every tuition check I sent instead of myself. I am sorry for the silence where there should have been words." Evelyn looked at the man who had shaped her, the man whose approval she had chased her entire life, the man who had taught her without meaning to that she was not enough. And she realized something. She had spent 34 years trying to earn his love, but sitting across from her now was not the giant of her childhood, not the distant figure whose attention she craved, just a tired old man who had made terrible mistakes and was finally perhaps too late trying to make them right. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? Richard was quiet for a long moment. A chance, he said finally. To do one thing right, to stand with you for once instead of against you. The board meeting, Evelyn said. Yes, Phillips has the votes. Not if I vote with you, Evelyn stared at him. You still own 15%, she said slowly. You've been abstaining for years, I know. If you vote with me, the project dies. The Riverside Commons stays residential. 50 families keep their homes, I know. Why would you do that? Richard looked at the paper Santa had on her desk. Because your grandmother was right, he said. Success means nothing if there is no one to share it with. And I would rather lose money than lose you again. The board meeting convened at 10 in the morning. The conference room was full, 12 board members plus legal counsel plus assistants taking notes. The long table gleamed under fluorescent lights. Coffee grew cold in ceramic cups. Phillips sat at the far end, his face composed and confident. He had done his math. He had counted his votes. He was certain of victory. Evelyn took her seat at the head of the table. She wore a charcoal suit, professional and severe. But around her neck, barely visible beneath her collar, hung a small pendant, the cotton ball from Theo's Santa hat. He had given it to her last week when the original had fallen off the laminated paper. For good luck, he had said. So you remember we're with you. She touched it now, feeling its softness against her skin. Let's begin, she said. The discussion lasted 2 hours. Phillips presented his case with surgical precision. The numbers were compelling. The return on investment was undeniable. The delay had already cost the company millions in lost opportunity. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he finished, she stood. Everything Mr. Phillips has said is true, she began. From a purely financial perspective, the Riverside Commons project makes sense. The numbers add up. The profits would be substantial. Our shareholders would be pleased. She paused. But I have learned something this year, something that doesn't show up on spreadsheets or quarterly reports. She looked around the table. There are 50 families living in that building, teachers and nurses and bus drivers, grandparents who have lived there for 30 years, children who walk to school with their friends, people who have built lives and memories and communities within those walls. If we proceed with this project, all of that disappears. 50 families displaced, 50 stories ended, 50 groups of people scattered to the winds, searching for housing they probably cannot afford. Phillips leaned forward. With respect, Miss Whitmore, that's not our concern. Our concern is return on investment. That's where you're wrong, Evelyn's voice was steady. Our concern is what kind of company we want to be, what kind of legacy we want to leave, whether we measure ourselves only in dollars or whether we have the courage to measure ourselves in something more. The room was silent. I am asking this board to cancel the Riverside Commons redevelopment project, to convert the building to permanent, affordable housing, to accept a smaller profit in exchange for a larger purpose. Phillips smiled. A lovely speech. But speeches don't change votes. I believe we have the numbers to proceed. Then let's vote. One by one, the board members declared their positions. The first 3 voted with Phillips. The next 2 voted with Evelyn. Back and forth it went, the count seesawing as each member spoke. When it was done, the tally stood at 6-6. A tie. Every eye in the room turned to the empty chair at the end of the table. Richard Whitmore's chair. He had not attended a board meeting in 3 years. His shares had been voted by proxy, always abstaining, always neutral. But today the chair was not empty. Richard stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a suit that hung looser than it once had. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. I believe I still have voting rights, he said. He walked slowly to his seat. Phillips's confident expression flickered. Richard, he said carefully, this is unexpected. I thought you had retired from active participation. I had, but some things are worth coming out of retirement for. Richard looked at his daughter. For the record, he said, I vote with Miss Whitmore. The room erupted. Phillips argued. Lawyers consulted. Minutes were reviewed, but the vote was clear. 7-6. The Riverside Commons project was dead. Evelyn sat in silence as the chaos swirled around her. She looked at her father. He nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was not healing. 20 years of damage could not be undone in a single moment. But it was a beginning. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. The Harrington restaurant glowed with warmth and light. Garlands of pine draped across the exposed beams. Candles flickered on every table. The pianist played Silent Night with the same reverence he had brought to the song for 30 years. Evelyn stood outside looking through the window. She could see them at table 17. Graham wore a button-down shirt instead of his work uniform. He had taken the night off for the first time in 4 years. His hair was combed, his face was relaxed. Theo sat beside him, bouncing with excitement. He wore a new sweater red with white snowflakes. On his head sat a paper Santa hat, freshly made the cotton ball firmly attached. He had made 3 this year, one for himself, one for his father, one for Evelyn. Evelyn pushed through the door. The warmth enveloped her immediately. The smell of pine and cinnamon and roasting meat. The sound of laughter and conversation and Christmas carols. She walked to table 17. Graham stood when he saw her. His face broke into a smile. A real smile, the kind that transformed him from a tired worker into someone vibrant and alive. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would." Evelyn looked at the table. It was set for 3. 3 napkins folded into swans. 3 water glasses catching the candlelight. 3 menus, though they all knew what they would order. Theo jumped up and threw his arms around her waist. "Evelyn, you're here. Dad said you were coming, but I wanted to make sure. I'm here." She hugged him back, feeling the fierce warmth of his small body against hers. "I made you something." Theo released her and reached under the table. He produced a rolled-up piece of paper tied with a ribbon. "It's a picture," he said. "I've been working on it for weeks. Dad helped me with some parts, but mostly I did it myself." Evelyn took the paper with trembling hands. She untied the ribbon. She unrolled the drawing. For a long moment, she could not speak. The picture showed 3 figures standing in front of a house. A man with brown hair, a woman with blonde hair, a boy in a red sweater. They all wore paper Santa hats. They all held hands. Above them, in careful letters, Theo had written a single word: family. Evelyn looked at the drawing. She looked at Theo. She looked at Graham, and she began to cry. Not the controlled tears she had learned to hide, not the silent weeping she saved for moments alone. Real tears, messy tears, the kind that came from a place so deep she had forgotten it existed. Theo looked worried. "Did I do it wrong, Dad? Did I do it wrong?" Graham put his hand on his son's shoulder. "No, buddy, you did it exactly right." Evelyn knelt down so she was eye level with Theo. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Really, really." She pulled him into another hug. Over his shoulder, she looked at Graham. His eyes were wet, too. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For saving me a chair." The dinner lasted 3 hours. They ordered too much food. They shared everything. They laughed when Theo spilled his hot chocolate and Evelyn caught it before it could ruin the tablecloth. They told stories. Graham told Theo about the Christmas when his own father had dressed up as Santa and gotten stuck in the chimney. Theo told Graham about the secret gift he had made for his teacher. Evelyn told them both about her grandmother, about the little house in Vermont, about the cookies left out for Santa, even though everyone knew the truth. They sang along when the pianist played Jingle Bells. They waved at Margaret, who was spending Christmas Eve with her own family for the first time in years, thanks to the new policies Evelyn had implemented. They watched the snow begin to fall outside the window light, and delicate, turning the city into something soft and forgiving. Near the end of the meal, Evelyn reached into her purse. She pulled out the laminated Santa hat, the one Theo had made for her a year ago, the one that had sat on her desk through every meeting, every decision, every moment of transformation. "I want you to know something," she said. "This hat changed my life." Theo's eyes went wide. That old thing, that old thing taught me something I had never learned. That belonging isn't earned. That love isn't a transaction. That sometimes the most valuable things in the world don't cost anything at all. She looked at Graham. "I spent 34 years trying to prove I was worthy, worthy of my father's attention, worthy of success, worthy of existence. And then a 7-year-old boy offered me a seat at his table, and I realized I had been measuring myself all wrong." Graham reached across the table and took her hand. "We're glad you joined us. I'm glad you let me." Theo looked between them with the knowing expression of a child who understood more than adults gave him credit for. "Does this mean you're going to keep coming to our Christmas parties?" Evelyn smiled. "Every single one." "What about other days? What do you mean?" "Like Tuesdays and Saturdays." and summer vacation. Are you going to come to those too? Evelyn looked at Graham. He nodded. If you'll have me. Theo pumped his fist. Yes, the restaurant began to empty. Families said their goodbyes. Children fell asleep in their parents' arms. Servers cleared tables and extinguished candles. But Graham, Evelyn, and Theo remained. They sat at table 17 as the clock struck midnight. Graham raised his water glass. To family, he said. Theo raised his hot chocolate. To family, Evelyn raised her wine. She looked at the two people who had found her when she was lost, who had offered her a place when she had none, who had taught her that Christmas was not about achievements or acquisitions or the endless pursuit of more. Christmas was about this. A table set for three, a drawing that said family, a paper Santa hat preserved in plastic like the treasure it was. To belonging, she said, to finding it when you least expect it, to earning nothing and receiving everything. They clinked their glasses together. Outside, the snow continued to fall. It blanketed the city in white. It softened the edges of buildings and buried the imperfections of streets. It transformed the familiar into something magical, something from a postcard, something from a gentler world. Evelyn looked out the window. She saw her reflection in the glass. She was wearing the paper Santa hat Theo had made for her tonight. The cotton ball was slightly lopsided. The construction paper was already beginning to crumple. She had never looked more beautiful. She turned back to Graham and Theo. The boy was yawning, fighting sleep with the determination of a child who did not want the night to end. Graham was watching him with that fierce protective love that Evelyn had once envied from across a crowded room. Now she was part of it, not because she had earned it, not because she had proven herself worthy, simply because she had asked. Can I join you? 4 words that had changed everything. She thought about her grandmother's letter, about the warning that had come 20 years too late, about the fear that Evelyn would become a monument to loneliness. She had been on that path. She had been building that monument brick by brick, achievement by achievement. She had been constructing a tower so tall that no one could reach her. And then a candle had flickered in a service alcove, and a child had hummed jingle bells, and something inside her had cracked. Evelyn Whitmore had spent her whole life learning the wrong lessons. Now finally she was learning the right ones. Christmas is not found at the VIP table. It is not found in achievements or acquisitions. It is not found in corner offices or penthouse apartments. It is not found in the approval of fathers who do not know how to love. Christmas is found wherever someone waits for you, wherever someone saves you a chair, wherever someone says without hesitation, without conditions, without expecting anything in return, you can sit with us. Theo's eyes finally closed. His head drooped onto Graham's shoulder. Graham looked at Evelyn with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. Thank you for letting me in. She reached across the table and took his hand. They sat in silence as the last candle flickered and died. They sat as the pianist played one final song and closed the lid of his piano. They sat as the restaurant grew dark and quiet and still. 3 people at a table set for 3. A family improbable and imperfect and absolutely real. Outside, the snow continued to fall. And Evelyn Whitmore, for the first time in her life, was exactly where she belonged.